So in this part of the tutorials in JavaScript, we're going to talk about this keyword. And as you have imagined, you have seen in throughout these tutorials, we have used this keyword a lot of times, and we've used it for different circumstances. For example, at the times that we're going to refer to an event or an object or itself alone. So right here in this tutorial, we're going to cover all of the conditions where we use this and how we're going to write it. So let us create a new file this.js, and also an HTML file using devel.html. So let's copy and paste it and rename it to this.html, and then here we're going to refer to this.js inside of it. Actually, it's changed. Okay, this.js, and there we go. Also, we need one tag, and that's enough for now. So actually, you can call this print. So let's see the result. So now let's save this, and inside this.js we're going to first create an object and see how this is going to be used inside of an object. So for example, let's create an introduction object. So I'm going to call this object introduction. So I can write const introduction, or const person, for example, or employee for example, and then the object is going to be inside of a block. And an object is pretty much like a map. So we have a key and then the value. So I can here write, for example, the employee has a first name and then the last name. First name, and inside of the first name we can write, for example, Alice, and the last name. I can write Johnson. Don't forget about the comma between the different elements of our object. And I can write age. So age 23, and then the role or position, and the position is human resource or HR here. So and then, for example, we can write, there's nothing more needed. So for example, I can write another thing called introduction. And then inside of our introduction, we want to have a kind of a string containing all of the data inside of the employee object. So we're going to use position, age, last name, and first name, and we're going to include all of them inside of the strings that is going to be for introduction. So here we can write a function, and after each function we have parentheses with nothing inside of it, and then we can write this dot first name plus, and then we need a space between the two, between the first name and the last name. This dot last name, and then we need another space with a plus, and then we need to say that, for example, or instead of this we can say, so Alice Johnson is, and then we have this dot age, and then we have years old. So we want to say Alice Johnson is 23 years old, and also let's have a space in here. And she is, and her position is HR, so her position is and for her position I can write this dot position. So let's save this and then also go up to the next line here. So there we go. So this is going to be our introduction. Also don't forget about return, because once you do not return anything, there will be nothing here. So now we can write document dot get elements by ID, and then we have print, and then we have dot inner HTML, and then we have employee dot introduction. Now let's see what happens here. So here let's open up the file consisting with this div.html. So as you can see, it's printed out something else, function results, and this shouldn't be what we've wanted here. So instead, so now in this one, we should do something else too, and we should have parentheses after the key here. So let's save this and see if everything is fixed. Now everything is fixed. So Alice Johnson is 23 years old and her position is HR. So we need a space right here after is to fix this. Okay, right here, and then it's better to have a dot at the end, so shouldn't have any space. So let's save this and refresh our page. Alice Johnson is 23 years old and her position is HR. Then we have the dot at the end. So perfect. So here we used this for referring to the object keys here, and then we can consist all of these features of Alice Johnson inside one sentence, which is introduction, and then bring it here afterwards. There are also other times when we use, so let me comment the entire part here and then go for the next case where it's completely a different example, and this keyword is going to be used for our HTML events. So for the HTML event, it's better to write the code inside of our HTML document. Now I saved this.js, and here I'm going to create something else. So here let's create another p tag. It's better to copy this one. Actually here we don't need a p tag, so we need a button, because we're going to have this for an event. So simply let's have a button, and then we want to write, for example, click here with capital, for example, click here, and then exclamation mark. So inside of this, we can write onClick for the button event. onClick, we can say here onClick equals to, let's not have spaces here, and then inside of it we can write what we need in JavaScript. This dot style and this dot style dot display, and this is going to be equal to none. So here you can click in order to remove the part. So okay, now it's correct. equal to none, and then this one is going to remove the whole the entire okay, now it's been fixed here. This dot style dot display, and it equals to none, so it will remove the key, the button here. So let's save this and see if there's any problem right here. As you can see, you can click here and then it will remove. So as you can see, we removed, so we used this here in order to handle the event in our HTML code. So by using this is going to refer to the button, and then it's going to give it a style for displaying, and because it is none, it's not going to show anything. It's going to make the button to disappear. So here we've removed the button using this, or it can be any other style. So it will change the style of the button, for example. So this is another way where you use this, and this is most of the time used inside of our HTML code because the events are inside of the HTML code. So now in the following, we're going to see what if we use this alone, and what if we use it without any dot or without any attributes. So let's write it. Let's write let x equal to this. And actually, this here is going to refer to the global scope of a global variable. So if we take a look at our browser, the window of the browser is going to be considered as the object that is global. So the global object inside of our browser is the window. So if here we use document dot get elements by ID, and then inside of the parentheses we write the print here, because we have commented out this print here. So here we can write dot inner HTML equals to x here. So let's save this and refresh the page. As you can see, object window is shown here, and click here is because of the last code inside of our HTML. So as you can see, object window is shown here, and it is because the window of the browser is the object, the global object, and that global object is brought here. So what if we have this inside of our function? So instead of this, let me comment it here and then write something like a function and return this. So here we have a function that has no input, and it has a block, and it's going to return this. So what does this going to bring for us? So function also the name of the function, my func, and here I return this, and this is going to be equal to, for example, x here. X equals to function, and then all this together. So now let's save this. Also, let's, for better readability, have indentations, and save this. Now let us refresh the page. As you can see, function my func returned this. So this looks a bit odd here. So now instead of x, we should write my func, and then also parentheses, and let's forget about x here, and let us also take care about the indentations to have for better readability. And so let's save the code and refresh the page, and as you can see, again we have window object. What if we use a strict mode here inside of our code? So let's write strict inside of the quotation marks. Let's write use strict, and let's see what happens when you use the strict mode. So I've saved the code, and as you can see, it's undefined. So using the strict mode, it's not going to recognize the global object, and as a result, it will not consider this as anything, so it's undefined. But if I comment this you will see that my function is going to be shown as the window object. And the window object is the only global object inside of our code. So let me just comment this part as well, up to here. And there we go. So let's continue with this part of the code related to objects, right? So also remove this one. There are also times, or it's better to have this commented out. So press Ctrl C and okay. But after this, I can write another object. So let's continue with the objects and see some other examples, because there are times that we have objects that we need to, for example, we have the first object and then inside the second object we refer to the first object and we get some data from it. So we call something, and then inside of that second one that uses the first one, we're going to use some of the information. So we use this. So let me write it for you to better understand. So for example, const employee, and then we have the object inside of the block, and for example here we have the information concerning the employee, and then inside of the other one, const introduction object, introduction. Okay, and then inside of it we only have the introduction of the employee. So this dot, so let me use this function right here. As the introduction. Also do not use equal, use colon instead. And there we go. So now we should use the call method. So now we want to call introduction and use the introduction. So it's better to change the name here. Let me change this to introduce. So we want to use introduce here, and with the introduction key here, we are going to introduce the employee here, who is Alice Johnson. So here I'm going to use this method like this. So I'm going to use introduce dot introduction, and then I'm going to call. So who am I going to call? I'm going to call employee. So I'm going to call the employee in order to introduce her, right? Or if any other employee who is a man, then introduce him. So generally this can be used in order to introduce, right? So you don't have to write the introduction for each one of them. So if you use, for example, employee 1 and then employee 2, you can call all of them, and this way your code is going to become much shorter and much more efficient. So let me do this right over here. Okay, there we go, and we had employee.introduction, const introduce. So then we have here, we have introduce.introduction, right? Okay, so let me write document dot get elements by ID. And then we have the print, and then we have dot inner HTML, and then inside of the parentheses we're going to have again, not parentheses, it's going to be equal to introduce dot introduction, and then the parentheses. So here it's going to print out whatever is inside of this, but how is this introduction going to access the employee? By just calling the employee. So this is very important, this is very vital in order to connect this object to the other object, and calling solve this problem. So let's save this code and refresh the page. Okay, there are 3 undefined here, undefined years old, and everything is undefined here because probably something is not connected, and probably this call here is written with a capital letter, I think. So let's save this. So now I think there is a better fix for this one. Probably we should write here let x equal to this one, and once we have connected these two together, then we're going to use that instead of writing introduce.introduction, which is going to give us undefined sentence. So a sentence with undefined parameters, we're going to connect these two, and by connecting, the result will be this introduce here with the connected items. So let's write x here and save the code. Now we can refresh the page, and here we should see something. Why isn't it happening? So let x introduce, and so we have introduce introduction, and then okay, here call should be with the small letter. Save this, and now let's see. Now as you can see, everything's been fixed. Alice Johnson is 23 years old and her position is HR. So now if I add another employee, our job is going to become much easier, because we're not going to have a second one, the introduction for the second one. As you can see, it is a very long sentence, so it's going to make our code much shorter and much more organized. It has a structure, and we write this only once, and then any other employee is going to be added here. So for example, this time Harry, then his last name could be anything. So for example, the football player Harry Kane. Okay, I don't know his age, maybe 27, and he's a player, football player. So there we go. Save this, and also do this for let y. Okay, let y equals to introduce dot introduction dot call, and then employee number 2, right? Employee number 2, and here do this a second time inside of another element, and here we can call this print number 2. Also in our HTML, this.html, we can write this one. Let's copy this. Print number 2 here. Let's save this, and now we can refresh the page and see this one. Harry Kane is 27 years old, and his position is football player. So let me fix this. Here in our code. So we can write if statement for if he or she for the sex, but here I can write his or her because we don't have time for that. But it's totally you can totally fix this with an if statement inside of your code, inside of your function. So we can add you can add a key here called sex in male or female, and if it's male, you can use his, or if it's female, you can use her. But now for now we can write his or her. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so we have also got something else called bind, and bind is somehow the same with the call, but with a little small difference. So I'm going to write the example right now. So bind is nearly the same, but here imagine that for Alice Johnson we have the introduction here, and we had it inside of a first employee, which is Alice Johnson, and then we want to use the very same thing for Harry too. So then we don't have this introduce object. So we can use this introduction for Harry too with the bind. So the first employee with the second employee will be bound to the first employee. So now with the example, you're going to understand this much better. So let me comment this part, and now we will be able to totally get everything. And commenting out will be from up to here. So let me write it over here. Now here we can write the very same thing right here. Copy and paste. But with a small difference, we don't have const introduce, and we can have this inside of our first employee. So const employee, and then we have this at the end. So let's uncomment this part. There we go. So, and here we need to add bind and bind. Here we don't need bind actually. So, and here we need introduction, right? So for the second employee, we need introduction. So I can use employee, because the first employee has introduction. Employee.introduction.bind employee number 2. So we want to have this introduction for the employee 2 using the key inside the employee 1. So for the next items, for the next employees, we're going to use the first employee introduction key here, which is introduction, right? So let y be this, and also we don't need this. Okay. And here again, as you can see, we use this, and then this, using this is going to help us bind the two objects together. If you didn't have this here, if you didn't have the keyword this here, you wouldn't be able to bind them together. So here, the employee number 2 uses the same introduction methods as the employee 1 without even having the introduction keyword, right? So let's save this and see it together. What happens? Okay, something is happening and it's not all right. So let's check our code. So now here the problem is for the bind we need to have parentheses, but let us look at this one. For this one, for the call, we do not need parentheses, okay? So keep that in mind, this is very important. So let's save the code and refresh the page. As you can see, Harry Kane is 27 years old and his position is football player. Perfect. So here the difference is that we use one of the keywords in the first one, and then we use it for the second employee, just as it is with the bind method. There's also another method which is call, and we use call in order to get one of the keywords inside a third object, which does not have the same keywords as the second employee, but it has a kind of introduce these keywords that you're going to call and use it for any employee that you want. So no matter you use bind or call or use it this way or the other way, however, I prefer call over the bind, because bind does work for one of the employees, but for the other employees you need to write only the names and other things. But this way you have only one object for introducing and all of the employees are the same. So, but doesn't really matter which one you choose. So in this tutorial, we learned about all of the different ways we use this. It could be for an event, it could be for an object, it could be for inside of the object, it could refer to the window, which is global object. And so it can also be used for when we want to use bind or call. In that kind of circumstance, the phrase this is going to be used and help us in order to manage the circumstance we are in. So that's it for this tutorial.